forward so that people can watch it later. So hello everyone, my name is Monica McCoubry. I am the Wildlife Education Specialist for the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission located in the Lincoln office. And Allison and I are tag teaming today. I'll let her introduce herself, but we're tag teaming this week, I guess, because it is National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So if you've been to the couple webinars that we had either yesterday or Monday, you kind of know already why we're doing these. But if you're new and you're watching this today, we're doing this because we want to raise some education and some awareness about what is happening with our invasive species. So it is a real problem in Nebraska. It's not some far off concept that, oh, you know, they're in Florida, they're in Vietnam. We don't have to worry about that here in Nebraska. We do. We have quite a few invasive species. And so every single day this week, we are highlighting different topics about those invasive species. So Monday was kind of a invasive species 101. What are we talking about? Yesterday, Allison talked about plants. Today is invasive wildlife. Tomorrow, we're going to have Christopher Starr join us from Nebraska Game and Parks. He's our AIS, or our aquatic invasive species person, and he's going to be talking about aquatics. And then Friday, we're going to be talking about insects. So different topic every single week, and just kind of highlighting some issues specifically here in our state, because that's where we are and that's what we care about. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Allison, and then she will talk to you about wildlife. So go ahead. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.
Oh, something I forgot to mention too. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get them answered as fast as we can. So either private message me or go ahead and ask a question to the group. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for being here today. And I'm excited to talk to you about invasive wildlife, specifically species we find here in Nebraska. And then in the end, we can open it up if you have any questions about those other invasive species we hear so much about in Florida and other places. This is National Invasive Species Week, and our governor has also made this Nebraska Invasive Species Awareness Week. So like Monica said, come back tomorrow and Friday at 10 a.m. and you can hear about 2 other topics, and also on the Nebraska Game and Parks education page, you can also see a recording of this and share it with your friends. So my name's Allison Zock, and I coordinate the Nebraska Invasive Species Program, which is a grant-funded program at the University of Nebraska. And it's funded by the Game and Parks Commission, Fish and Wildlife Service, and other donors. And I serve as a clearinghouse of information of all the different invasive species of concern in Nebraska. So what is an invasive species? The federal definition is it's a non-native species to an ecosystem that has impacts to human health, the environment, or the economy. And we spend $120 billion a year managing invasive species in the United States. And invasive species are to blame for the listing of 42% of threatened and endangered species. And that's due to their competition with those species for food and habitat. So there are several characteristics that define an invasive species, and the first would be a rapid growth rate. And so many of these invasive wildlife that we find in America are very quick to grow very large. So they grow very quickly, and so they're able to avoid predators. They also lack predators because many of these species are from a different part of the world where they co-evolved with other species that keep them in check. And so an example of a species that lacks predators would be a feral hog, which we do have in Nebraska. These feral hogs lack predators because they are very smart, they're good at hiding, and we'll talk about some other their other adaptations, but they do lack predators to keep them fully in check in the US. Some of their adaptations is when a domesticated hog gets released or escapes their pens, they quickly revert to the Eurasian boar, and those characteristics include coarse hair that allows them to live through our winters, as well as they become very afraid of humans, and so they're able to hide and evade them so they can't be hunted or controlled. They also have rapid reproduction. A feral hog female can reproduce 2 litters a year, and each litter can have 6 individuals, and those are called sounders, those groups. And so very quickly, you have a lot of piglets on the landscape and a lot of adults. So we're going to talk here first about a white-nose syndrome, and this is an impact on a wildlife. We have 13 different species of bats that have been found in Nebraska. 3 of those are not commonly found, but white-nose syndrome is a concern for many of those species. And so this is a cold-loving fungus that comes to us from Europe. And this fungus loves cold. And so when these bats are overwintering in caves or in buildings in groups, they can transmit this from one to another. And so what this causes is that white material on their nose and their wings, and that burns. And so as they're hibernating, it will wake them up. And so they will fly around because it burns, and they'll try to find water, and they'll expend all of their fat resources, and they will die. So there's lots of research underway to find controls for this. And one thing that they have found is that there's a Pseudomonas bacteria, which is naturally occurring, and these bats actually carry certain strains of it. And so they have done research where they spray bats in caves to put that Pseudomonas bacteria on them, as well as broadcasting it throughout caves in a large spray pattern. And so they've had some success with that. Of course, the difficulty part of this is a lot of these bats overwinter in caves that are hard to get to, if not impossible. So this is still a very serious problem. And of course, bats are very important because they eat lots of insects. A little brown bat will eat half of its body weight every hour in the nighttime. So these bats are great to have in your backyard. Don't be afraid of them. They want to eat bugs. They don't want to suck your blood. And so bats are really important. And so there's great research underway. And so hopefully we don't lose the millions of bats that we first thought we would in 2006 when we found this in the US. And this over on the right shows the map of the current distribution of this. We do have it in Nebraska, but we don't have a ton of caves and communal bat colonies like they do on the East Coast. So it to be seen how bad this will be for us in Nebraska. So what can you do? We're all looking for hobbies and things to do now. So one thing would be you can build a bat house or buy one. And so you can either put these high up in a tree or on a post. And what this can do is provide habitat for bats and pups. So feel free to Google that, look online, or email me, and I'd be happy to give you some more information about that. It's important if you ever see a bat to never touch it, never disturb it. If it's sleeping outside, please leave it alone. And of course, if you find one in your house, please contact someone to correctly remove it. Bird baths, bats will actually drink out of your bird bath, or if you have a pond in your backyard, and that's a great source of water to help them, help them out there. And finally, leaving dead trees. Dead trees are an important habitat for bats and their pups. And so if you have any dead trees that you can leave in your yard and that makes sense, you'd be providing them with some good habitat. So the next thing I'm going to talk about are starlings. And starlings were introduced into the United States intentionally in the 1930s by a group that thought we should have all of the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's plays in the United States. And the good thing about that is the majority of those birds did not thrive. Unfortunately, one that did was the European starling. And so I'm sure you've seen this bird here in Nebraska, whether it be out in the country where they have large groups that fly in patterns, or here locally in your backyard on your bird feeder, they can have quite big groups. And so the problem with these birds is they're very aggressive. And so they're competing with our songbirds and our preferred birds for food and habitat. And so on the left is the juvenile, and on the right is the adult. And the adults lay 4 to 7 eggs, and they hatch after 11 to 13 days. So this is one of those examples of rapid and prolific reproduction, and that's why they have such big groups. And we'll talk about some of their impacts, but these birds will travel 15 to 30 miles in order to feed and roost. And so they have quite a long distance that they move from where they actually roost and sleep to where they go and feed during the day and move back. And so this is an example of a roosting site in Omaha, Nebraska, downtown. It's pretty gross, these pictures, but this is from James Teal at the USDA APHIS. And so he did a research study to find out where these birds were coming from, because they were just decimating this building and all the cars parked next to it with their droppings. And unfortunately, there are some health risks that come along with these droppings, such as they can aspirate. So you can actually breathe in some of these histoplasmosis and different bacteria that grow on these. And so this can be very dangerous to the public. And so it's important when we have an infestation like this to have USDA control it, so we don't get people sick. Another concern, of course, is noise pollution. So you can imagine if we have hundreds of starlings on the top of this building, it's going to be very loud and very distracting in downtown Omaha. you can probably imagine, these don't smell really great to have hundreds of birds defecating on top of a building. And so another concern of this is a cost to the building or whoever owns the property to clean this up on a regular basis, because these birds are coming back every night and every day and decimating this. Of course, there's going to be a cost to clean up even on the sidewalks and the properties below it too. And then this can actually cause corrosion because their droppings actually have acid in them. So over time, this can actually break down buildings, which is pretty amazing.
Allison, how many birds or how much of that defecation would you have to cause, if someone breathed in just a little bit of it, it's not going to give them histoplasmosis, but how much of that poop basically do you have to have this be a concern?
Yeah, you have to have quite a bit. And so if we look here at this roof area, if you were in an enclosed area, let's say that they got into like a enclosed barn, for instance, if you had a lot of accumulation in an inside area, you would definitely want to have some mask on so that you're not able to breathe it in, but just a small amount of droppings, you know, from a group by your bird feeder, for example, that's not going to harm you. We're really talking about quite a bit of poop in an enclosed area. Where you're not having wind to break that up. So the big impact that starlings have in Nebraska is that they feed on livestock rations. And so we know that we have lots of feedlots and different animal confinements in Nebraska. And so what these birds do is they create big congregates. So you can see how many starlings are in this picture, because they have so many offspring, they get these huge groups. And so this is an example of that Omaha roost I just showed you. This is the 15 to 30 miles that they were traveling every day to feed at a feedlot, and then they'd fly back to downtown Omaha and roost there at night. And so James Teal with the USDA did that study to find, okay, where are these guys eating during the day? Where are they roosting at night? How am I going to control them? Because the USDA can use different methods to control these starlings, because of course this is going to cost farmers money because they're losing food for their cattle, but it also can transmit diseases to these cattle, and so or other livestock. So this is an example of why this can cost thousands of dollars to producers in Nebraska. So I mentioned James Teal with USDA APHIS, and of course they have an office in Nebraska, and they have people throughout the state. And what they do is they use a variety of different trapping methods to control starlings. And so starlings are very smart, and so they have to use a variety of different trapping scenarios to make sure that they catch them all. And then of course they can use chemicals to control them. So that's how we control starlings in Nebraska when we have these large infestations like that picture I showed you. Now, if you have starlings in your backyard that are a nuisance, I would refer you to like the wild bird habitat store. If you have bird feeders, they can tell you feeds that, you know, might turn off those starlings. I know, you know, I put safflower out when I get these really bad 2 times in the year, and it does a good job of kind of scaring them off so they don't eat all my good seed. So the next species I want to talk to you about is the Eurasian collared-dove. And this is native to the Middle East. And this came to America in the 1970s. It was actually in the Bahamas. They had a pet store with these Eurasian collared-doves they were selling as pets. And there was a burglary that let some of these doves out, and the pet store just released the rest of them. And unfortunately, they've done really well in America. And so we definitely have these in Nebraska now. You may even see one in your backyard. And what I would tell you to look for is this collar around the back of their neck. But it's more likely you're going to hear them. So I'm going to show you a video and let you listen here. On this video, you're going to listen and hear our native mourning dove, which is native, and it's a great species to have in your backyard. But the Eurasian collared-dove, I think, sounds like a crow. So listen to this closely. You're going to hear a native dove, and then you're also going to hear the Eurasian collared-dove. So if you hear this kind of crow, is kind of how I explain it, sound, and you look up and you go, oh, it looks like a mourning dove, then you probably have a Eurasian collared dove. And unfortunately, these are pretty aggressive to our native songbirds. They also carry a parasite that they can shed at a bird feeder. So it's really important that you clean your bird feeders with a low bleach solution, probably every month, if not more frequently. I say it's a good thing to do at your bird baths as well, just to be careful. But that parasite can then get transmitted to other songbirds, and that can be fatal to them. And if a hawk or an eagle were to eat this dove that has that parasite, it can also cause illness in that bird of prey. So these birds incubate their eggs for 19 days. So this is, again, an example of prolific reproduction. The young are only in that nest for 15 to 20 days, and that female will actually start to lay a new clutch while they're still young in the original nest. And so these birds can have 3 to 6 broods a year, and that's pretty amazing. There is a dove hunting season, so you're not probably allowed to poison these in your backyard, but you are allowed to hunt these year round with a dove permit. So you can go to the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission to learn more about that hunting season, but that really is our best management tool. So please go out and dove hunt. So feral hogs, this would be an example of a invasive mammal we have in Nebraska. These are actually domesticated hogs that are descended from Eurasian boars. So when we domesticated pigs in Nebraska or in the United States for our livestock needs, we actually took the Eurasian boar and then domesticated it. And so it started looking like our pink pigs now. But when these pigs are released or escape into the wild, they very quickly revert to those characteristics of the Eurasian boar. And so you'll see on the left bottom here, these are some domesticated hogs that have escaped. And you'll see that they start getting this coarse hair, and they also start getting more feral in their activities or how they're afraid of humans. And they're very smart. So they're very good at outwitting people that are trying to hunt them. And on the right here is how they root around. So these guys cause thousands of dollars of damage to agricultural properties because they root around to try to find that food, and it just decimates farm fields. And so it's a nightmare for any farmers that have these on their properties. I talked earlier about the reproduction. That female is going to have 5 to 6 piglets in a litter, and she can do that 2 times a year. So quickly, those pigs on the landscape will reproduce to high numbers. So let me give you a little history lesson about feral hogs in Nebraska. Back in 2002, we didn't have any regulations in the state. We didn't think that pigs could live in the wild in the wintertime in Nebraska. We thought, oh, they're just going to freeze to death. We're safe. Well, that quickly became not the case. In 2004, we started seeing feral hogs in different locations in Nebraska, and the Game and Parks got really attuned to this and said, we really need to do something because these feral hogs are doing just fine in the wintertime. And guess what? We just keep getting more and more of these populations. And what they found is that people like having feral hogs because they're kind of fun to hunt. And once you have them out there, they're good at hiding from people. And so you just have more and more of these pigs reproducing. And so the Game and Parks very quickly said, you know what? We really need to do something. And so starting in 2004, they had a really intensive control action that they went into place to eradicate all of these infestations to make sure Nebraska did not have any feral hog populations. And these populations went pretty uncontrolled for 4 years, is why this really became such a big issue. And they actually found sounders, which are those groups of females with those piglets, of 30 plus individuals. And so it really became apparent we have a big problem here, and it's only going to get worse. So they started to put towards resources into eradicating these pigs, these feral hogs. Also, they put in regulations. So in Nebraska, it is illegal for anyone but the Game and Parks Commission to kill feral hogs. So you can go down south to some states and you can go get a hunting permit and kill as many feral hogs as you want. But in Nebraska, we were one of the early states to say, we're not going to go that route. We've seen that if we leave feral hogs out there and we rely on hunting, they're really smart, and we're not going to eradicate the majority of them. We're only going to get more and more feral hogs out there, and they're so destructive to our agriculture properties when they are out there that we can't do that. So Game and Parks has some regulations. You cannot shoot or kill or hunt feral hogs, you have to report them to the Game and Parks, and they will then take control options. So if you ever see a feral hog, please let me know. I will let them know, or Sam Wilson is the contact at Game and Parks, specifically if you have any questions about those regulations. So specifically what Game Parks' management strategy is to stop all incentives for having feral hogs. So in the South, people release domesticated hogs to get, those feral hogs out there, or they actually release Eurasian boars. We don't allow that in Nebraska, and we have early on said, no, we're not going to allow that. And so there's been an early shutdown of any of those incentives to say, yeah, it's fun to hunt, but it's just not worth our natural resources and our ag industries, the damage they could have caused. And so there's also an important public awareness to say, yeah, a lot of states are allowing hunting, and a lot of people enjoy that, but guess what? It's not controlling those populations, and that's why in Nebraska we're not going that route. And then specifically, Game and Parks works to control those populations once they are identified. So we kill that population right away. We don't allow them to get larger. Now, there's many other states still seriously in the battle for excuse me, controlling populations of feral hogs. And so on the left here, this shows you in Nebraska, a picture from Sam Wilson. If you could just imagine these sounders running through your yard and causing damage. And so on the right here, I just want to show you the number of counties in these different states that still have feral hogs and are very much in a fight to control them. And of course, people are having their properties damaged by these sounders. So this is a modeling that they did by the USGS to show you the range expansions if things don't change. So in the South, there's a lot of hunting still occurring and lack of control in some locations, and that's really causing a proliferation of where these feral hogs are moving. And so the USGS and other wildlife agencies came together and said, we need to do something about this. We do not want, the United States to look like this with feral hogs. So the good news is that there's a lot of efforts going into play right now. And this is just an example of if you rely on hunting itself, it's not going to control the population. And this shows that you would need to control 70% of a population of feral hogs in Missouri to keep that population stable, right? To keep it from going up. But in reality, if you just leave it up to hunting, you normally get 28 to 31% of the population controlled, and that's with great hunters. These feral hogs are very hard to hunt. And so in Missouri, they put a lot of money towards actually paying biologists to hunt them. And so they looked at some different methods, and this was a pretty, 210 sample size, but what they found in Nebraska or in Missouri that worked really well was actually hog dogs. So they have these dogs that are attuned to the smell of feral hogs, and those were the most efficient way for them to go and track them and to eradicate some populations. Hunters were only about 25% successful. So again, hunting is a very low success rate if that's what you're relying on for your control methods. In Nebraska, when we had some of those eradications I talked about, using helicopters and aerial snipers was actually the most effective way that we used in Nebraska for that. So there's some exciting things going on to control these feral hogs in the southern United States. So it doesn't look like that map I just showed you. And some things are that there is millions of dollars being given so that they can do some different rounds of projects to control feral hogs in those southern states. And so in Missouri, they spent $10 million the last several years to do some eradications in Missouri. They learned a lot from that, and now they're expanding that study to other states in the South. So finally, I want to kind of close out with saying, what can you do to prevent the introduction of invasive wildlife into Nebraska? And the first thing is, don't let it loose. We all have pets. We all have fish, turtles, snakes, all sorts of different pets. And sometimes they get big, or we can't afford to feed them anymore. And so it might seem humane to let them loose, let them, into the environment so they can be free, rather than giving them back to a pet store or euthanizing them possibly. So the thing about that is, releasing a pet into the wild is very cruel for the animal. The reality is that your pets are not adapted to live in Nebraska. They're from different parts of the world, some of them. And so releasing them in the wild will probably give them a really painful death. And so please do not let it loose, for the sake of your pet, and also because those species, if they were to establish, can cause terrible impacts to our native species, our native wildlife that we love so much. And this is an example of what's called aquarium dumping. So if you have an aquarium, not only don't we want you to dump that in a pond or a lake because you'd release your turtle or your fish, but also because sometimes you have plants in there, and those plants can really establish in those water bodies and become very difficult, if not impossible, to control. So it's not only the plants, but it's also the animals or even the pathogens or the diseases that you might be putting in that lake or water body. Now, there's some interesting exotics that have been found in Nebraska, and Dr. Dennis Farrar with the university and some other professionals could talk your ear off, I'm sure, about this, but these are just articles that I was able to find of alligators being found at Kearney, Nebraska, and even Carter Lake, Nebraska, by Omaha Airport. So alligators have been released in Nebraska. It is not legal to own an alligator in most, if not all cases in Nebraska without a permit. But people, unfortunately, have illegal pet trade. So alligators do occur in Nebraska. They're not going to thrive. They're not going to have people to mate with. So they are reported. But again, don't ever release this. If you hear somebody has an alligator, please report it to your animal control. We need those animals to be in a zoo, not in somebody's bathtub. Another species would be a Burmese python. We have had these found in the Lincoln and Omaha area, and I'm sure other parts of the state, and those are given to animal control, and then Dr. Dennis Farrar with the university will take possession of those, assess their health, and then they'll find them appropriate homes instead of somebody's own home. So I've actually had a personal experience with this. My husband and I were in our backyard last June, and we were by our pollinator garden, which has a concrete slab next to it. And my husband looked over and looked at me and said, "Don't move." And I was really afraid that it was a coyote or something that was there to hurt my little dog. But it was this guy. It was a bearded dragon. And he was just sitting like that in the sun, enjoying itself. And both of us have never seen one before. So I grabbed this dog kennel. He grabbed a broom. The little guy thankfully didn't run away. And so we were able to capture it really easily. I drove it down to the Humane Society, and they picked him up and said he's in great health. He must have just been released. If you hadn't found him, he would have probably gotten sick and probably have died a bad death. And so they gave him to Dr. I can't think of his name, Dennis Ferraro, and he was able to find a good home for him. And so actually the same month we found him in our backyard, 4 other people found the same type of dragon in their backyard. So unfortunately, this is one of those lizards that people are abandoning and releasing, and please don't do that. Please turn it into your Humane Society Animal Control, and they will find him a good home for you. So with that, please come to my website and learn about even more invasive species than I've talked about today, including other invasive wildlife species. I also have some ID guides and teaching tools I'd love to send you. My contact information is all on there on anyinvasives.com. And finally, here's my contact information, and I'll be happy to put that in the chat for you. Please contact me. I'd love to give you some resources and answer any questions you have on feral hogs or anything else. With that, I'll stop my share.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. I'm glad you talked a lot about, well, not a lot. I guess you mentioned like the exotics and stuff. That is kind of something that I super nerd out about, especially those Burmese pythons. It's a very interesting thing. So yeah, but thank you everyone for joining us. We'll stick around for a little bit. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Like we talked about, this week is National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So there is a national program, the North American Invasive Species Management Association, long words there, but they are also doing a webinar series this week as well, but it's more on a national level. So today they are doing one, aquatic nuisance species priorities for prevention and management. If you are interested, they are free to attend. I think there's 5 different presentations total, but I will go ahead and put that webinar registration there. Like I said, they're free to attend, but you do need to register for them in the chat for you guys if you are interested. They're going to talk about different recommendations for zebra mussels. What else are they talking about? Nuisance species. different Great Lakes regions. So again, more of a national level and a little bit more in-depth information, but it is happening today if you are interested in doing that as well. So, and then also if anyone was not able to attend today, so if you had a friend that really wanted to but wasn't able to come, or maybe you joined in late and didn't catch that first part here, we will be putting these on our Nebraska Game and Parks Education YouTube channel. I will go ahead and put that in the chat as well for everybody. They're going to be up probably this afternoon or so after they go live. So give us a few hours and they'll probably be up for you guys to watch as well. So other than that, I think if anyone has any questions or anything like that, please feel free to put them in the chat or utilize Allison's website, anyinvasives.com as well. Allison, what should you do if you do report, if I go out to my garden this summer and I see a Burmese python? I would be excited about that, but I know we shouldn't be excited about that. What should I do if I do see a Burmese python in my backyard? You said call animal control, or is there somewhere I could report stuff?
Yeah, the immediate thing if you find a live animal is to call your local animal control. And so Humane Society here in Lincoln, Animal Control in Omaha, whatever your local one is. There's also a Nebraska Wildlife Rehab that if you can't get a hold of someone, please call them and I'm sure they can put you in touch with someone. But instead of telling me on my website or calling me, they can actually help you. They handle wildlife and they will find that animal a good home. So those are the right people to control.
Perfect. Well, hopefully that doesn't happen.
I hope so.
It does. So
I hope so, but it might, unfortunately.
Yes. All right. Well, if anyone has any other questions, we can stay on for about 30 more seconds or so. Otherwise, thanks for joining us. And remember to come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Christopher Starr is going to be talking to us about aquatic invasive species. So please feel free to put a question in the chat. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks everybody.
Everyone. All right. We'll see you tomorrow, Allison.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Yep.